So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to look into exporting for transcription. You have two bins here under footage. Go ahead and open those up. So these are media, and you can tell what days they were shot. So these were shot on 0303, and these were shot on 0306. So what we're going to do now is, I mentioned exporting for transcription. So what does that mean? Why are we doing that? So I mentioned earlier story producers. So story producers, as I said before, usually take the footage and sort of sort it into something that can resemble a story. And a really important part of that is identifying interviews that can act as background or a bridge to some kind of action that's happening on screen. So if you have a fight between two people, you're not just going to randomly cut to a fight and show the fight. You're going to have some lead in of somebody talking about why the fight happened, what happened when it was going on. Oh, he got so drunk, we went to the bar, and then he got hit in the face, and then you'd have that happening or something like that. I mean, you might just cut to it, but oftentimes the story producers are going to use the dialogue to direct the story. And they're actually going to take pieces of dialogue that different people said, and they're going to use that to put together a story. So because of that, the dialogue is a really important thing for the story producer to have easy access to. And what you can do in Media Composer is you can have dialogue generated from video. Now, in the newest versions of Media Composer, you can actually do this in the program itself. It's sort of a wild card as to whether it's reliable. So even now, a lot of shows, instead of using that feature, which I will show you, will still export interviews to send out to companies that will write up transcripts either through something AI related or through a person actually listening and typing it out. And then you will get that transcript back. You will import it into Avid and you will sync it up to the footage so that the story editor can then go through that footage and can find bytes that they want to use and cut them into a string out to hand off to the editor. That was a lot that I just said. But let me show you what I mean. So what I want you to do is we're going to go through all the footage that is on these two cameras, and we are going to try to identify two things. Number one, we're going to try to identify what are called interviews. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's an interview, but it's in contrast to another thing, which is called an OTF. An OTF is a term in reality TV. It stands for on the fly, and it's an interview, but it's not a formal interview. It's an interview that happens during the action. So, for example, if you have somebody who is driving a car and the camera person starts asking questions and the person answers those questions.
It seems like there's the
So
coal
this
culture, and if you're not working in the coal mines, what are you doing? You know what I mean? There's like kind of it's I guess it's an industry town, right?
So this is a perfect example of an OTF. So it's not a formal sit-down interview. The camera person is recording some kind of action, and the subject is talking. And it's an interview, but it's not a formal interview. So this would be called an OTF. An interview is something more like this, where you've got somebody that is sitting down in a formal setting and answering questions as they're being asked.
Some little corners, I guess you can cut or whatever.
Okay. What we're going to do is, and you can also follow along on the PDF that you have. So if you go down to exporting interviews for transcription, so there's a step-by-step here that tells you exactly what to do. So we're going to go ahead and create a new bin at the top of the project with the date of the footage. So 0303 and then interviews, INTVS. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of the clips from that day. I'm going to sort them by clip name,
which you can do by clicking on the column name and pressing Command E.
so that they show up in the timeline in order. Then I'm going to grab them, I'm going to drag them, and I'm going to drop them onto the timeline. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing, but for the other day. So I'll create another bin called 0307 underscore interviews. And I'm going to clear my monitor, which basically removes what's in the timeline. And I'm going to grab all these clips, I'm going to drag them, and I'm going to drop them into the timeline. All right, so we're working with the timeline here. We're working with the source and record monitor. These are all things I haven't really covered yet. So I'll take a second to explain what exactly all this stuff is. So I mentioned before the interface. So we have our bin in the upper left. So right here, we have our source monitor. Right here, we have our record monitor. And at the bottom, we have our timeline. Now, the idea behind the source monitor is that you would load anything into the source monitor that you want to cut into the timeline. So that can be clips or it can be sequences. But by default, if you double click on a clip, it will load into the source monitor. If you double click on a sequence, it will load into the record monitor. If you wanted to use a sequence as a source, what you have to do is you have to grab the sequence, drag it, and drop it into your source monitor. And that will load the sequence into your source monitor. Now, the timeline by default is going to show you what's on the record monitor, but you can also see what's on the source monitor. And the way that you do that is by clicking this little button at the bottom, which says toggle source record. So if I click that, I am now seeing the contents of the source monitor. And you'll see as I drag my playhead around, it moves the playhead on the source monitor. If I switch back, if I drag my playhead around, it moves the playhead on the record monitor. All right, so we've now built out these two sequences. It looks like I put my sequences in the wrong place because by default, when I created them, it put them in the same bin where the clips were, but that's not where I wanted them. I actually wanted them in the bin for that day's interviews. So I'm gonna take this sequence, I'll rename it 0303 IMTVS. And then I will drag it and drop it into 0303 interviews. And then I'll do the same with this one. 0307 underscore IMTVS. And then I will drag and drop that into this one here. So now I can close out my footage bins. And now I just have my interview bins. And my interview bins contain a timeline with all of the clips from that day. Okay, so what I would do at this point is I would look through this footage just by playing it back. And I would look for interviews and OTFs. I know that sounds really boring, and it kind of is. So you can kind of tell when there's an OTF because usually either you can't see the person's face or the person is turned towards the camera person. So like you hear them talking here, I have to hear what they're saying to know if it's an OTF. It's an OTF if they're answering a question or talking to the camera person.
Dig a dirt hole here to make the punch you bait, you lure.
That's probably an OTF. So I'd want to find the beginning of that.
I mean, you want him to turn toward me as you do these things, but tell me about, and while
So
you're
this
doing
is the beginning of the OTF. So what I'd want to do is I'd want to set an in point where the OTF begins by hitting I on the keyboard, then find where it ends.
what you're doing.
And I'm using my J, K, and L keys to shuttle through this footage. I'm waiting for a long pause.
So we start that over and then I'll have you show me the snapping of the trap. But so yeah, you just do that again and just look up and back like you're just training me or something.
See, you gotta dig your dirt hole up in bank, so put your lure and step in. Yes.
All right, so there was actually a cut there. I don't know if you saw that. So it cut from that to that. But I can actually include, I mean, it depends on the show. They might care. But in general, I will include multiple clips in what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a subsequence. So I'll do that now. So I'm going to find the end of this. So I would say that's the end. So the end of this clip right here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a subsequence by dragging and dropping this icon right here, which is the sequence icon, into the bin. And you'll see that I now have, if I double click on it, I now have a sequence that is just those two clips of the guy talking.
What you're doing and where it is in reference to the trap.
Right? Everybody have that? Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to rename this sequence. And I'm going to name the sequence. I want to make sure that I'm consistent with what I said in here. So I'm going to name the sequence with the show code, followed by the shoot date, followed by the person's name, followed by whether it's an interview or an OTF, followed by a number. It's a lot of information. So I'm going to copy and paste this. The show code is HZKYD. If it's a show that is not a pilot, usually that will have a number after it, which represents the episode number. So it'd be like HZKYD 103, which would represent the number, but this one doesn't have a number. Then I will have the shoot date. In this case, I only have that it's 0307. Now for this guy's name, usually what you will get is a reference sheet. And I have given you one of those. So if you go to your desktop, you go to AEB 2024 Media, go into Part 1, Media, Interview Ref. There's a PDF called Interviewees. So this should tell you who this is. These names are all made up. So this is Walter Orville. So we're going to call this Walter Interview. Except this isn't an interview. So we're going to call it Walter OTF 01. Now I'm going to continue and I'm going to move on to the next clip. You can generally tell when there's an OTF or interview going on. The next clip seems like an OTF to me. This one.
You can see the picture.
Yeah, so this is probably an OTF. So I would probably place an endpoint at the beginning of this one. And it's not a bad idea to potentially go longer than you need to. Because, I mean, what's the harm? So if there's a break in the middle, like let's say they get out and nothing happens for like 10 minutes, you could break it up if you wanted to. But I'm going to go ahead and set the out point right here. Now, as I said before, some shows will not want you to do this where I include multiple clips in a single interview export. But with footage like this, where it's unnecessarily broken up because somebody just stopped filming, there's really no reason to export each one of these as an individual clip. So,
You know what?
yeah.
Oh, real quick. So I don't know if in reality to you there's multiple takes, but let's say they're doing an interview and they ask the same question again because it got screwed up. Would you include both takes in that same sequence?
Yeah. You include everything that's said.
The whole thing. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not your job to decide what's usable and what's not. It's just your job to get it out the door.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and create a subsequence of that. I'm going to copy the name and I'm going to call this Walter OTF2. All right. So I could go through and do this whole sequence. I'm just going to do like one more to demo to you guys, except I'm not going to do this sequence. I'm going to go back to 0303 and I'm going to do this guy. So
Through it as briefly as you can.
now I could wait until what's his name? I could wait until Quincy starts talking to start my clip, but sometimes it helps to include what the camera person says in the script because it gives context. So it's not a bad idea to just include everything that's said. So I'll set an in point here and I'll look for some garbage on the end. Like,
They look delicious, but they're not.
Well,
sweet. Wow.
he's still talking, so that's still interview. I'd honestly probably do a whole of this. So I'd probably stop here. It's kind of up to you. And then I would create a sequence from that. So that would be, this is not an OTF, this is an interview. So this would be 0303 Quincy interview 01. Oh, interview 01. Okay. INTV. All right. So we now have our interview and we have two OTFs. So what I want you guys to do, if you don't want, and doesn't matter to me. What you can do once the class is over is you can go through and do this entire thing, export OTFs and interviews for everything. But what we're going to do now is we're going to jump over to exporting them. So if you open up output tools at the top of the project, you'll see a couple things in here. What we want to look at right now is this transcription timecode burn. So if we go back to our interviews bin and go to Walter OTF 01, what we're going to do is we're actually going to drop on top of this Walter OTF interview a timecode burn. So to create a new video track to place it on top of, go ahead and go up to timeline, new video track. And then under output tools, grab your transcription timecode burn and drop it on the top layer. So the monitor is on track 1. So right now I'm only seeing everything from track 1 down. If I want to see my timecode burn, I have to look at track 2 down. So you'll see I now see my timecode burn. So I mentioned that a lot of shows won't want you to include multiple clips in an export. And the reason that I think it's okay to do, at least in this situation, is because the timecode burn that I've used, instead of being a record timecode burn, which would just tell you the timecode of the sequence, is actually a source timecode burn. So you'll see that even though these two clips are in here, when the transcription person gets from this point to this point, they will be writing down the time codes.
Just do that again.
And they
just look
will
up and back like you're just training me or something.
And I will notice that the time code jumps. Actually, I won't. Well, the clip name changes. So if they're any good at their job, then they will note that the clip name changes in the script. If you want to play it safe, and this would be a question for your lead or your post supervisor, you could also do this as two separate interviews, and basically every clip would be its own interview in here. So we've now added a transcription timecode burn. And this transcription timecode burn I created from the effect palette by basically dropping a timecode generator on top. So if you go to generator, timecode burn in, that's exactly what this is. I took a timecode burn in and I specified certain things about it. Specifically, I set it to source timecode instead of record timecode. So I did source timecode. And then I set the clip name as a second field, source clip name. So that's exactly what I did. Some other shows will do things differently. Personally, I think this is the best way to do it, because if you were to lose this sequence, you will still be able to find these clips. And I'll show you that in just a second. We've got two clips that are ready to export. Well, actually, no, I've got to add, I'll add another video track. Adding a video track is Command Y. So I'll go ahead and add a video track, move my monitor up to the higher track. I'll drop my transcription timecode burn up there. I'm going to open this one up. And I'll replace the transcription timecode burn on this one because I added my own other one. All right, so I now have these two that are ready to export. I'm going to select both of them. I'm going to go to File, Output, Export to File. And then under Export Setting, I'm going to go to Options, and I'm going to choose MOV or MP4, depends on my specs. And then I'm going to reference whatever I got from the transcription company. In this case, I want you to, let's say that the transcription company has really old systems and they can't accept anything that's HD. So they want 640 by 360 footage. So what we're going to do is in here, let's make it an MP4. So you can tell from here, this is where we select our file container. So I'm going to choose MP4. And for preset, I'm going to look for 640 by 360 and I'm not going to find it because it's not anything that anyone uses. So instead, I'm going to do custom and I'm going to type in 640 and it should autofill with 360 because 640 by 360 is 16 by 9. Now what I'm going to do, I don't have to worry about the color space of the frame rate because I'm not doing a frame rate conversion on export. I would not recommend doing that. You don't have to worry about the aspect ratio. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to H.264 and I'm going to choose my bit rate. I'll leave it on constant bit rate, or I could do variable single pass bit rate and choose a top and a bottom bit rate. I'll just do constant. And I'll do whatever it says on their sheet. So let's say their sheet says 800 kilobits per second. In the older versions of Media Composer that exported with QuickTime, the bit rate was always specified in kilobits per second. So you may see spec sheets that list off kilobits per second. If you see a spec sheet that says 800 kilobits per second, that would be 0.8 megabits per second. If it says 2200 kilobits per second, that would be 2.2 megabits per second. Now, another thing to keep in mind is if you're exporting an H.264, as I said before, you should export it with AAC audio. AAC is compressed audio, and that's always best with an H.264 because an H.264 is compressed video. So we'll go ahead and save this as a preset. We'll call this transcription. All right, and then I'm going to choose where to save it to, and I'll go ahead and hit save, and it will export those two files. And then from there, I will upload them and send them off to transcription. If you were exporting in QuickTime, it would be real time. With the new export engine, which is called UME, it's much faster. Now, when you get that transcription back, what you're going to receive is something that looks like this. So if you go back to your folder on the desktop, AEB 2024 media, and go to part 1, media, script, you will see a Word document in here. If you don't have Microsoft Word, you can probably open it with, I don't know, something else. The script that you get back will look something like this. So this is the transcription. It tells me the file name and the source time code of the clips. So this is a question and this is an answer from Jane. This is different from the footage that we just looked through. I think this is in there somewhere, but we'll find out in a minute. When you get the clip, if they send you a Word document, you're going to want to reformat it before you bring it into Media Composer. And the way that you would do that is all of this information is in that PDF. So if you receive a Word document, change the following settings. So you go to, in Microsoft Word, go to Format, Document, and then for the left, you type in 2. For the right, you type in 3. And basically what that does is it makes everything much smaller so that it can easily be moved off to the side in a bin window. And then I'll go to File or Save As, and then I'll choose Plain Text. and I'll hit save. And then when I get this dialog here, I would choose insert line breaks. And that will break it up so that automatically everything shows up in a column. So I'll hit insert line breaks and then I'll hit OK. And then when I open that file up, it will look like this. And the whole point of that is that you want to make it so that once it's brought into Avid, it can easily be moved off to the side and doesn't take up the entire screen when somebody's reading it. Because if you were to save this without the line breaks, then it would just travel on forever. It wouldn't work very well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to import that script. So I'm going to go up to File, New, and I'm going to choose New Script. What you're going to import is in Part 1, Media, Script. You're going to import this Jane interview. I'll go ahead and hit Open, and you'll see that you now have Jane's interview in the bin. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to find this clip. So I know that the clip name is 1547_02. Now that's marginally helpful, but it doesn't actually tell me the shoot date, which really should be in there. That's actually my fault that I didn't include it. Fortunately, the script that they sent me says the shoot date at the top. So what I can do is I can go back to the original bin with all of the media from that shoot date, and I can find this clip. So 1547, these are going to be in order. So here's 1547, and this is probably Jane talking.
Mind sites to become.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to find where she says this. For these surface mine sites, I think that's the beginning.
For these surface mine sites to become.
Okay, so that's the beginning. I'm going to set an endpoint there, and then I'm going to find the last thing that she says.
I'll, you want me to work with you or
Okay, so the last thing that is said is actually spoken by the camera guy, which is fine. So now what I'm going to do, I set an endpoint at the first thing and an out point at the last thing. I'm going to select the first and last thing in the script. I'm going to grab this clip. I'm going to drag it and I'm going to drop it onto the script. All right, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click right here and I'm going to go up to Script and I'm going to choose Script Sync AI. I guess they call it AI, Script Sync AI now. Now there's a bunch of options in here. And actually, let me back up for a second. Some of you may not have this option. If you are on the trial version of Media Composer, you will not have this button. It will be grayed out. And the reason for that is that it is a paid module of Media Composer. And it basically allows you to sync up video with a pre-existing script. I've got my track selected and I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And it should go pretty quickly. And now it has sunk up this text with my video.
There's still a separation.
And you'll see that if I click on any of these, it jumps to what she's saying. But it actually gives a little bit of pre-roll so that it will jump to right before what she says on that line.
You know, you need bees to be a part of that. So.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about troubleshooting. So what happens if you run it the first time and you get nothing? Nothing comes across, or maybe you get a little bit, but that's about it. So one of the things that you want to watch out for is that when you go to Script Sync, by default, it's going to select all of your audio tracks. But if not all of your audio tracks have Jane talking, and some of them have somebody else talking, that's likely going to throw it off. So what you want to do is you want to deselect all the tracks that Jane is not on, and then only sync those tracks. And you also actually, I didn't check this before, but I should have. There's a box at the bottom that says sync between first and last mark. And what that's going to do is it's only going to look at the sections of my timeline between where I place the in point and the out point. And it's going to try to sync that up. So if there's a bunch of stuff at the beginning where somebody was talking and I don't care about it, then it won't even look at that because it wasn't within my in and out points. So I'll go ahead and hit cancel. So this is what people are referring to when they say script sync, is the script sync module in Media Composer. Now, what if I run this and there's some stuff where she says things, but it doesn't catch it? Well, what I can do is I can actually create my own script marks. So let's say that it didn't get this one. What I can do is I can go to the point where she says this.
Right.
Okay.
You don't have to say it real
So
quick. I'm
what's the
sorry to
question
be
again
so.
then?
Just, is
Okay.
Hazard
We need to-
Kentucky
we need to
crucial?
change Yeah. Hey,
Okay, so she says it right there.
yeah. Hey,
So I'm going to place an endpoint there. I select the clip right here, and then I hit Shift M. What it will do is it will actually create a script mark, just like the script sync function did, that references exactly the point in my timeline where I was when I did that.
Crucial
Which
to the
yeah, absolutely. Because hazard,
So if you find that it's missing things, you can actually go in, find the line in the text, then find the point where she says the line, place an endpoint, and then place a script mark by doing Shift M. That's what I set it to, I think, on your keyboard. If you don't have it, you can go into Tools, Command Palette, and you can actually find script mark. Let's go to Script, add script mark, and then you can just make it active.
Yeah,
And then
it
click.
is there.
All right, so that is how you add a script mark if script sync missed it. On some projects, they will want you to take all of the scripts from each person and combine them into a script based on when the footage was shot. So the first day of shooting, you'd have scripts for that day. Then the next day of shooting, you'd have, scripts for that day, and they would all be in one master script in order. The way that you could do that is by importing the scripts and then combining them before you script sync. So if I go to new script, I'll import that again. And obviously it's the same thing. But let's say that I have two scripts. Before I script sync anything, what I would do is I would go up to this button right here, which is edit. I would copy the text. Then I would go to this one. I would go to edit. I would add some room at the top. And I would paste. And then I would undo the edit. And now I have both scripts together. Now, if I've already script synced one, I can technically paste text above it. It'll just get kind of weird and wonky. What you cannot do is take an already synced up script and copy it into another script. Any script that you are putting into another script will have to be resynced. So I mentioned that this process isn't really necessary anymore. The reason I say that is that in Media Composer 2023.8, I think it is, they introduced something they called Script Sync AI. You can still do what we did, where you bring in a transcript and it'll sync it up, or you can actually generate the transcript from within Avid. So I'll go to footage and I'll find one of these. Actually, let's go to this one. All right, so here's the same thing. And what I'll do is I will just right click on it and I will go to create script from clip. And there it is. It just did that by itself. It's not fantastic. It starts seemingly
these surface mind sites to become
starts in the middle of a sentence and it doesn't say who the speaker is, which is not ideal because it's marginally useless if you don't designate a speaker, but it's on its way. And I think the next version of Media Composer or, the next few versions, it will be at a point where it could potentially replace the whole workflow that you just saw with exporting interviews for transcription. And basically all you have to do is just go through, right click on clips and go to create script from clip.
Are we allowed to edit that one that AI created and
Yeah, sure.
on our own add like the speaker name if we wanted to?
Yeah, you just click on this and then
Just
you
like the other one.
make
Okay.
changes that you want
And
to
it
make.
won't throw it off when you add like the syncing that it did?
Oh,
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's moving it down. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.